Welcome to the 15th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm AToves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on the latest UTSA football win against Middle Tennessee and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for our listeners to love or hate. It may not have played out the way that we wanted it to, but the Roadrunners came away with a conference win, beating Middle Tennessee 27-13. The Roadrunners are now 3-0 on the season, 1-0 in Conference USA for the second straight year. This marks the first time in program history that UTSA has opened 3-0 in consecutive years. The Roadrunners' defense was the story of the game, holding Middle Tennessee scoreless until the last few minutes of the fourth quarter. The defense finally got the interception they were looking for this season from Corey Mayfield Jr., and Lorenzo Dantzler added a fumble return for a touchdown. The Runners held Middle Tennessee to just under 200 yards of total offense and only 8 yards rushing. On the offensive side of the ball, the play wasn't up to UTSA standards, but they got the job done, adding 20 points from a 33-yard touchdown pass to Zachary Franklin, a 12-yard touchdown pass to Cephus, and a pair of field goals from Hunter Duplessis. There were also 3 turnovers, including 2 interceptions thrown by Harris and a fumble by J.T. Clark. The Roadrunners ended the night with 452 yards offense, 277 yards passing, and 175 yards rushing. Overall, not the performance the Runners were hoping for, but certainly a more dominant performance than last year's close win. So overall, what were your thoughts of the game?
Well, I mean, you kind of already mentioned it. A little sputtering in the game. Some of it was due to mistakes, kind of penalties. But the other was due to some of this poor officiating. I mean, I think a lot of people have talked about it. And there was certainly enough critics out there in the stands booing, letting the refs know that this was a poor job. Defensive pass interference was, I don't know.
Very subjective.
Yes. I mean, it's a subjective call as it is, but come on, like there were some obvious ones out there that were left on the field. But I would say it also stacks up as just another game where UTSA was in control, but they just didn't play smart, and the score was closer than it needed to be. I think we'll talk a little bit about the defensive performance near the end with some of these subs. But I'm going to give you some stats now. We've gone through a quarter of the season, which is crazy already. 3 games. So quarter of the season in, here's what we have. This team is on pace for the following regular season stats. 48 penalties, which is the fewest ever in program history. 5,500 total offensive yards, which is about 458 per game, most ever. 2,932 total defensive yards, which is about 244.3 per game, least allowed ever. And they're averaging 39 per game, giving up 14, also best evers. Now, we've talked a little bit about 2017, and we've said, there are some similarities. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of similarities here, because we had that FCS team in there. It's helped the stats and kind of bloat them. So I still think that looking forward a little bit, this team certainly, if it plays a little bit better, these stats aren't going to hold up. I think offensively they might, but defensively I think we'll give up some more yards, probably give up some, a few more points. But this defense, I think, I'll gush about them a little bit later, but I think when the team kind of comes together and plays complete games, which is always difficult at the collegiate level, especially G5, I think this team is really good. And there's a reason why we thought, even when we first saw the spring schedule, why we believed that they had a chance to win every single game, because they're that talented. And I think the coaching has also helped. So any other overall thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are things that were disappointing about this game. And, you can tell that we have improved as a program and that we can, sort of nitpick on some of these things, because a couple of years ago we would have been thrilled with this win. But the good thing is we definitely felt like we were, like you mentioned, we were in control the whole time. You felt at some point in the fourth quarter that we weren't going to pull out that shutout, but you never felt like Middle Tennessee was really going to be able to come back and win. So, overall, it just felt like not our best effort, but certainly, in comparison to where we've been in the last couple of years, it shows you the progress of the program.
Yeah, I'd agree. So I think let's just jump into the offense right now. For me, I felt that Lunny's play calling in this game left a lot to be desired. Mm-hmm. Some of it may have been because of the mistakes. Some of it may have been because of penalties. But, I gave him a bunch of praise against Illinois, because he started doing these quick passes to Franklin and Cephus, little slant passes, and let them just run all over the Illinois secondary. I mean, I can see why you don't bring it out against Lamar, but it just felt like he's not putting Frank into the best position. Frank's still being effective, but asking him, especially from his arm strength, asking him to go from essentially throw to the far sideline, and then having him throw across field, that's not his strength. It kind of floats the ball a little bit because he's just doesn't have the power to do it. Plus, he's usually getting rushed, so he's throwing off one foot. He's not getting a full throw in there. I mean, even with Josh, I would say even with Lowell, they've got stronger arms, but I still feel like they would struggle with those. So I get trying to get passes to the receivers quickly, but this just seems like it's not a good combo. And I wonder if he's just doing that for right now and then maybe changing it up later. I would hope so. The other thing is in the red zone, he's been throwing a lot of fades and a lot of streaks where Frank's just not getting good passes in there. I mean, he's not putting enough air at times, and sometimes he's just throwing it well out of bounds. So I think there can be better play calling in there to at least get sincere, a couple opportunities. If you're really just going to be throwing jump balls like that, I still don't even think that that's Frank's strength. I think Josh struggles at it too. So if that's not really a strength, then why did we keep doing it? Okay. It just feels like it's over and over. Let's just keep putting that square peg in the round hole. So I don't understand that. We'll see what happens. But, I would say, looking at the other parts in this game, you've got the penalties, which you kind of talked about.
Yeah.
Those non-pass interference calls felt like they just left yardage there because instead of getting a first down, we're going to second down and 10 or, whatever the down and distance were. But then we also had those self-inflicted penalties like the Brady touchdown when you had, I believe it was Demetrius. No, it wasn't Demetrius.
I thought it was Rolf.
Rolf, thank you. It was Brandon Rolf who had just gotten that face mask penalty. It really wasn't needed, and if you really kind of watch the play, he kind of got pushed back, and it looked like he was grasping in the air, and he just happened to grab that face mask. But still, unnecessary. Like, why are you even grasping in the air? If you're falling backwards, you're falling backwards. Just try to get in the way and let Frank get that pass off. But, there were other small mistakes here and there. Like Zakari had a holding penalty earlier, I think, when Cephus caught a pass. And it just felt weird, especially coming off a couple of games where you didn't see those issues.
Right.
Just felt like that concentration was off, and I don't know if it was because they've had a lot of home cooking or whatever it is, but there's just seems. Yeah, we could say it was eating the cheese, but it just felt like they had a lot of just self-inflicted mistakes, and that really hurt the offensive flow. Any thoughts from you with that?
I mean, honestly, this game should have been a much larger margin of victory for UTSA because without those penalties, we would have had a couple of additional scores. It just seemed like, for some reason that starting offense was kind of off in the game against Lamar, and then they were off on this game. And, the concern for me is that as we look ahead to playing Memphis, who is probably one of the best teams that we're going to play this season, we can't have that offense show up. We need the offense that played against Illinois to show up in Memphis so that we can win that game, because we can't just continue to rely on our defense and the strength of our defense. At some point, they're going to get tired. They allowed, a couple of big plays right at the end of the game.
Even against Illinois, they allowed some plays in the second quarter after we had, after the team had gotten up 14-0, they allowed some plays. So it's like the defense isn't infallible, so the offense needs to
especially the longer that they're on the field.
Right.
Those things are going to happen. So, we've got to, really tighten up our offensive play so that, we can eliminate these mistakes and put the opponent away. Because I think we really could have killed the spirit of Middle Tennessee if some of those mistakes hadn't happened in the first half and we had gotten up to an even bigger lead.
I agree. I think, what's really frustrating is you think that they would start getting some crispness here, especially with the way they started, kind of like I've already talked about before, but you kind of hope that they would be able to have really started getting a better rhythm and at least get Frank in a better rhythm to where getting into a better flow in the game as opposed to starting out so slowly. And it just it worries you a little bit because it it does start feeling like 2017 again. Like,
yeah.
you're relying on that defense, and the offense is really good between the 20s, but once you get to the red zone, we get brain cramps.
Yeah, and I wonder, too, if one of the reasons why we haven't had a better rushing game this season is, because we're still, based on injury, having to kind of shuffle the offensive line a little bit, and is that part of the reason why, we just can't quite seem to get our rushing game going? I mean, it's sort of interesting if you go back and you listen to what Traylor said at the beginning of the season, in terms of the percentage of rushing versus passing, we're not anywhere close to what he wanted. But fortunately, we've been successful in our passing game, because if we weren't, then we wouldn't have the success that we've had this season. It's kind of interesting to go back and look at, now we have a healthy Brendan Brady and Sincere, and yet we are getting yards touching. I mean, this game Sincere got to 100 yards, but we really haven't had those breakout rushing yards that we've expected to see this season.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I think blocking wise, it feels like some of these blocking grades have been a little bit lower. Mm-hmm. I think that's got something to do with it. Now, in terms of, you talked about sort of the line, it is a little bit weird, because this is a veteran line. It's not like the super seniors this year weren't there, and then we had to rely on some of the freshmen or some of the younger players on the team, and essentially would have had a little bit much more inconsistency. So it's a little baffling, but again, you're hoping that maybe they figure it out. I guess it's just going to be something to watch.
Yeah, and again, it feels like nitpicking, because it's not like they've been bad, by any means, but they just haven't been as good as we expected.
Right, and I think one last thing would be, maybe it's the tempo, because there have been times when the tempo has been quite quick,
right.
And they've placed the ball down, and then that snap comes quickly. So I think that might play a role in it too. Mm-hmm. But it seemed fine against Lamar and Illinois. So it's bizarre that it's the third game where this kind of starts coming up. But maybe it is some fatigue starting to set in, which could be a concern. So let's go into the individual performances. One thing I really wanted to bring up about Frank, I thought he played a good game. Certainly, again, missed, left some plays out there, but it was good to see him actually running. The first two games, there really wasn't many Frank runs, whether designed or in that read play. So, I thought it was interesting that we unveiled it finally against Middle Tennessee. Now, it didn't really lead to a bunch of big plays, but again, kind of like we were talking about, between the 20s, those kind of popped a little bit more, but it just didn't seem like it led to much. We still kind of bogged down once we got closer to the red zone. So the only other thing I wanted to mention and want to kind of get your thoughts on was the fact that, some of these subpar offensive performances, to me, for some in the fan base, would kind of think of it as a reflection of Frank, like the inconsistency. We already know that he isn't, we've talked about some of his deficiencies. So, I kind of get the feeling at times that, fans may start seeing this offensive struggles and say, oh, it's Frank. Like, bring in Josh, bring in Lowell, bring in somebody. Let's spark this team and let's put up 50 on somebody. But I don't think it's that easy. So what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you have to bring up the fact that he threw 2 interceptions, which obviously, one of them was completely on him because, he was just staring down the receiver. And then the other one, he just didn't place the ball in the right spot for Tyke. But overall, I mean, I think Frank has, again, improved in his, he's getting the ball out faster. He's, making better decisions. Traylor said that he's had plays where he, it's an RPO, so he could run. But he's, made the decision to either hand it off or to throw instead. So, it doesn't sound like they're trying to limit Frank's running. It just seems like Frank's been making the decision not to run. But, I mean, overall, I think his performance is improved, but we did see a dip in his confidence this game that was kind of shades of last year, Frank, versus what we've seen from him so far this year.
No, I think that's a good point. I think he certainly handles this team well in terms of the offensive reins. You know what you're going to get from him. I just hope to see a little bit more variety in the passing plays, or at least the passing options, so that he can spread it around on the field as opposed to really just focusing on sideline passes because it just feels
Right.
like so many times it's just, well, if he throws it out of bounds, it'll be incomplete. Or we can get a big catch out of it. But no matter what, we're not going to put it in the middle of the field where there's several defenders. And I think that can be to his detriment at times. I think that's limiting his field of vision, where he should be able to see the whole field at this point in his career and really be spreading that ball out. And I think that might be where he's more effective. So with that, I will say Zakari dominant again. He had a PFF grade of 79.7, which is the third highest on the team. That first touchdown, I'm laughing already because I saw the double move that he put on the cornerback, pretty much put him on skates. And as soon as he made that move back upfield, it was pretty much a, sort of an out and up. As soon as he got that, you laughed at me because I got up and said touchdown.
Yeah, he was like at least 5 yards outside of the the end zone at that point. You were standing up yelling touchdown, and everyone else is like, what was
and the
happening?
ball hadn't even and I think I thought I had gotten up at the point that Frank was releasing the ball, because I think Frank was like realizing, oh my god, that was a terrible play by the cornerback. I thought it just made the throw easier for Frank. However, Frank did do like a pump fake on that play, but you know what? It wasn't needed because Zakari just made that cornerback bite so hard, which was bizarre. I don't understand why he did that, because he didn't have any safety help. It was just a weird play by Middle Tennessee, and as vaunted as everybody kept talking about this Middle Tennessee defense, that's not a play that I would have imagined to happen.
And it's a shame you couldn't quite see it on TV, because you couldn't really tell how he got so open when we were rewatching it on television.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great move. So, I was gushing. Obviously, like I said, I got up and, very premature, but still, I had to do it. JT Clark had a pretty good performance. PFF grade was about 59.7. That fumble was costly. I think, he was trying to stay up and try to get those extra yards. We talked about it, especially in the stands. But it just felt like he didn't need to fight so hard for it. Make the catch, live to fight another day. And that's all that Frank really does himself. So, I would have hoped that Frank would go over to him and say, look, just make the catch and don't, you start getting spun around, just put both hands around that ball and let's just go down and we'll keep moving. But, I think he just got really loose with the ball. He started getting spun around, and at that point, you're getting defenders swarming in, and you're in trouble. I will say for the offensive line, KD and Mackay, which is interesting, our right side of the line was good. We had our troubles on the left side of the line, which is really where Frank, actually, his line of vision is at, because that's where he opens up to when he starts passing. So I think I'd rather prefer that than for him to be pressured from the backside, from the right side, and really have some issues. Now, we didn't have Spencer Burford, but, again, I still think that it's a veteran offensive line, so there's got to be some other things that are going on here. And they had to have known well enough in time that Burford wasn't playing. Now, I could be wrong there, but I think they had some time to make some adjustments. Any other thoughts on the offense?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, again, good performance. Not as good as we wanted, but a good performance overall.
Yeah. So we talk about the defense. It still looked incredibly fast to me on this turf. I don't know how many other games they're going to have on turf versus grass. I mean, obviously we know how many they'll have on turf, I should say, because we know how many more home games they'll have. But if we're talking about outdoor stadiums with turf versus grass, this team looks fast. And, I've been comparing it to that 2017 team, because that 2017 team defense is the best statistical defense ever in school history. And right now, this defense is really hanging with them. So, I think the difference with these two teams, though, is that this defense just has more impact players at each position as opposed to that 2017 team, which really had a thin. It was quite thin in depth. So, some people, you got some injuries, like you had Josiah missing a lot of time during that season. It really hurt the linebacking depth, and it really started hurting the team as the season wore on until he came back. But even then, it just was difficult. So they couldn't afford some of these injuries. This team, I think, can. And in saying that, first play of the game, Tariq Woolen lays the wood. I mean, it's the big play, or big hit, on the Middle Tennessee running back.
Yep.
And it almost kind of, to me, felt like you're gonna have to earn every single yard you get against us. Now I will say, real quick, Tariq Woolen did get a laughable pass interference call. I still don't understand what he did wrong there. They said it on the broadcast on our rewatch today, but that had nothing to do with it. Rashad, when the receiver went up and Tariq is essentially running into him, Rashad's already got the ball in his hands.
Right.
So it's the receiver had no way of making the play. He was never going to be in position. I still don't understand how it was pass interference. They talk about face guarding. It doesn't matter. There's nothing to do with it. He didn't have to turn his head around. He didn't have to do anything. So, laughable. But this defense was just dominant from beginning to end. We just kept looking at each other at times, just going, wow, we're in the backfield again. Like it felt like the Lamar game at times to me. This defensive line would just be in the backfield, and I was like, this is an FBS opponent. It's not FCS.
Yeah, I mean, I know there had been some critique of Middle Tennessee's offensive line, but they just looked awful against our defense. I mean, every time you turned around, they were getting, pressure on the quarterback. They were sacking the quarterback. There was tackle for loss. I mean, we were just really beating up on Middle Tennessee in a way that I was completely surprised to see. I just didn't think that we were going to have that much pressure on them.
Yeah, and I think what also goes to this is not only were we fast, but I felt like we're more confident in our tackling aspect. So I don't know if they really have worked on that, but I don't know how to put it. But it does give you, I think, a good feeling because there are going to be other teams that are going to try to spread this defense out. That said, this team had only given up until really the subs came in the fourth quarter. This team had only given up 88 total yards.
Right.
88 total yards. So when you've been talking about, hey, we were living in the backfield, you think about Woolen's hit, and you think about just it. At times, really felt like there was 12, maybe 13 defenders out there, and there only was 11. It was 11 on 11, but man, it felt like there was a roadrunner around the ball.
Yeah,
pretty much every play.
There's a couple of things that this defense, they've played well through the first two games, but they hadn't really gotten any sacks. They hadn't gotten the interception. I mean, you can argue we got 2 interceptions because, Wisdom's interception really should have stood, and then, Corey Mayfield turned around and got another interception. And then we added another fumble return for a touchdown. So, I mean, it really was just an absolutely dominant game, through almost the entire game. I mean, yeah, right at the very end, last couple of minutes, we let them get away with 2 big plays. But, other than that, I mean, it was pretty textbook in a lot of ways.
The subs lost focus, but that first touchdown was wide open. It felt similar to the Illinois plays where they were like wide open, except this time the tight end didn't go in motion. Instead, at the snap, he got up, looked like he was gonna block, and then he just dragged across the field, and he was wide open. Nobody even went to him. I think that actually got credited to your boy Kelechi for not guarding, and he also gave up another big play. And so, there are some of these times where I'm looking at it, and you see some of these big mistakes from our coverage team, secondary mostly. So you wonder, is that a flaw of this defense, and is that going to be what's going to be exploited more often the rest of the season? I think it might, because this is the second game out of 3 that we've seen somebody so wide open and coverage just breaks down. So whether it's a defense that's called or something's happening, but I think teams are starting to learn about this. Now, that said, it's a slow developing play, so there's a reason why teams aren't going to be trying to fully exploit it, because you've got to hope that our pass rushers aren't going to get to the quarterback. So with that, let's talk about the individual performances. Like we talked about, defensive line was overall dominant. Brandon Matterson and Christian Clayton led the lineman grades. Matterson 76.5, Clayton 75.2. I don't know. I just kept seeing their numbers, 99, 95, repeatedly. Maybe it's just where we were sitting and we just happened to see them flying all over the place. But it just felt like they were they were covering quite a bit of space. Now, in the linebacking crew, I got to say, Feaster, man, he seems to have one big crunching hit every single game.
Yeah.
You'll hear this loud crunch of a hit, and you look up, the guy getting up is Feaster. It's like, I don't know. It's impressive, though. Especially coming from Kansas, where he probably didn't get to land those kind of hits. Now he's at CUSA, and he's making some thunderous hits. I do have another note here. Hello, Avery Morris. Impressive. Another one of our youngsters. He certainly was flying around the ball. Had a tackle for loss there in the fourth quarter. Again, just flying around. The linebackers sometimes, I don't know, they just seem as fast as the secondary, which is scary. And then, Harmonson and Ligon, just stout up the middle. Harmonson blowing up an early fourth down play for Middle Tennessee. I don't know. Those guys have just kept growing. I know Ligon's just in a sophomore season technically, but he is really maturing and looking really good. Harmonson, I didn't think much of him when we first recruited him, and he actually landed on the team. But man, I don't know where we'd be without him at this point. He has really, really carved out a nice spot on this team. The last thing is Rashad Wisdom. It's been, to me, really quiet this season. He hasn't had many, but looking back at how many snaps he's taken on defense, it really hasn't been that many. I mean, I think he played just about all the defensive plays against Illinois, but he only put up, about 34 plays against Middle Tennessee. It's interesting. However, I think I take that, giving him less plays and being this dominant for so long, than making him play essentially a complete four quarters in 2 games, and saying we've got 5 more games that we have to play over the next 5 weeks, and having seen him potentially wear down. So
well, I think part of it too is just we have more depth at safety. It's not that he's not playing as well, it's that you have more depth, and so you don't see him quite as much, when you see some of these other safeties making plays as well.
Yeah, and when I say he's just been quiet, it's just usually you have some big Wisdom play.
Yeah.
And he hasn't had that play. Much
and he almost had it this game.
Well, yeah.
That penalty took it away. Otherwise,
I mean, he did have a big play where he really smacked the kicker at the end of the game on the onside.
Oh,
but
yeah. He did.
At that point, I mean, it was near the end of the game. But you look for those big plays from him to really, I think, spark the defense during the game. It just hasn't happened, and I think just because we have so many thumpers and so many just big hitters and fast defenders, so I think it's kind of left him to actually play a true safety this time, as opposed to having to come up with the big play every single down.
Right.
So what about special teams? I mean, we'll go over this real quick. Dean had to work on his punts mostly in the second half, but for the most part, he was effective. I mean, I don't think there was anything you could really talk about in terms of, he's really fallen off.
Yeah, I mean, special teams, I think, was just a little inconsistent this game. Hunter had one more kick out of bounds. We didn't see that last game. He had the 2 missed field goals, which, you really don't expect from Hunter. One of them, a little bit, he had the leg for it. He was just off that first field goal that was like 54 yards.
Yeah.
You don't typically see him make attempts past the 50-yard line either. But then again, we had some really good punt returns from Sticks again. He was 5 for 68 yards. So, there were kind of good and bad. Nothing, just that really stood out, I guess. It was kind of okay. I think that was the words that Traylor used too in his post-game interview. He said, special teams was okay.
And throughout this whole discussion, I think you look at special teams being okay, you look at the defense being incredibly dominant, and the offense not really playing up to their level, and you get that story of this is why they felt unsatisfied at the end of the game. And I'll say this, if I'm a defender, I would be scared, especially if I was one of the subs that kind of let some of those big plays happen, because Charles Wiley looks like he's going to also yell at you. Not just coaches. I think he's going to yell at you at practice and to let you know, what were you thinking? This, you got to stay focused. This is how we get to the conference championship. This is how we, win this many games. So, I think the overall story that we saw was
was good enough because it was better than what Middle Tennessee was.
And it also gives you a hungry team. So let's fix those errors and move on.
All right, so what did we learn from the game?
Well, we still had some issues in the run game. We kind of talked about a little bit during the recap. It's just interesting to note here that last year the top two rushers in the nation were Breece Hall and Sincere McCormick. And both Iowa State and UTSA have had issues with their run game this year. Specifically, both their top rushers, right? So with Breece and Sincere, last night, Breece had, I think, 21 carries for like about 100 or so yards, 101 yards. Sincere had similar numbers. It's just interesting, though, that it just seems like they're both being really quiet. Mm-hmm. It's not, hasn't seemed like the big runs from both of them. They are getting, some good chunks of yardage here or there, but it's not like what it felt like last year when they were, I think, a little more dominating.
Yeah, I think to totally change subjects, but one of the other things we learned from the game is that apparently the students will turn out if you feed them pizza. Because we did have about the same student turnout that we had this game. So that was really kind of encouraging to see them. And obviously, Trailer feeding them helped and convinced them to come. And then, whatever the bus issue was that they experienced last time, UTSA fixed that by adding the shuttle. So, hopefully we're going to continue to see our students show up the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was the pizza. I think there's been genuine excitement, but I think it's fun to point at the pizza as a thing. I will say this, I've seen some fans, kind of talk about, okay, the students are here, but where else is San Antonio? And to that, I would just simply put it this way: who cares if the other San Antonians aren't showing up? At this point, they're missing out on a great product because they're not even showing up to UIW either. So, San Antonio, when we're talked about in terms of NFL circles, this is what the NFL looks at. You won't show up to college games. You won't show up to, anything else that's put on the field. So what makes them think that you're going to be able to support an NFL team? So just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, and the other thing that we learned, well, actually that we didn't learn, but I think that others learned thanks to television and Twitter is, they got to see what we've seen in terms of Leroy Watson and his dance moves. He had a nice little move there when they made a first down. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can check out the Twitter accounts of Bootleg Bentley or April Ansira. Both of them tweeted it out. So you can go check out Leroy Watson and his dance moves.
That's us for the game. It's fun. So, yeah, check him out. So let's talk players of the game. First, let's start with the bootleg honorable mention on the offensive side, and that's Oscar Cardenas. I'll wait to gush about Oscar a little bit later when we talk about the breakout players. So let's go on to the players of the game. For me, it was Zachary Franklin and Josh Cephus. Zachary had 8 catches for 114 yards. Josh had 8 catches for 84 yards. Both scored a touchdown. Total of 16 catches for 198 yards, 2 touchdowns, 44% of the offensive total yards. Let me say that again, 44%. This duo last week against Lamar in limited duty had 10 catches for 128 yards, which was 30% of the total offensive yards. At Illinois, they had 16 catches for 228 yards, 46% of the total offensive yards. Look, Sincere has had a tough go of it, and it's just incredible that these two have really stepped up. Obviously, Frank is looking for both of them. We're getting plays in there for each of them. In this game, they really, against a conference opponent, enforced themselves onto the field. So, really, I think when people start looking at UTSA and they're trying to figure out are they a product worth watching, San Antonio, you're missing out if you're not coming to see Zachary and Josh on the field on a weekly basis. With that, let's go to the defensive players of the game. Honorable mention, I'm going the whole entire defensive line. So we knew the Middle Tennessee offensive line, like we talked about before, was just not very strong. The defensive line made them look like kids. I mean, they were getting thrown around. The defensive line was just really getting that push over and over, hence why they had only given up 88 yards. Sure, it's a team game, it's a team concept, but the defensive line really enforced themselves in the game, and that to me really was a key for this defense. That said, a player of the game actually comes from the defensive line, and it's Tremaine Bell. Tremaine had an incredible game. 89.7 PFF, which is essentially 0.3 of a point away from having an elite performance. He had 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 2 quarterback hurries in 18 snaps. So in that 18 snaps, 28% of the snaps he played, he had a defensive statistic come up. 2 quarterback hurries? Are you kidding me? He's not getting to the quarterback, but he's certainly pressuring him. 2 sacks, a forced fumble. Tremaine was all over the place. So lucky to have him, and just a great game from Tremaine this week. All right, so let's talk about the breakout players. This is really, we've taken it on the chin this year. Let's just put it this way. Special teams, neither one of us put up any points whatsoever because there was no influence from either player. On defense, Caden Holt didn't even play, or at least that I know. I think he's just going to be redshirted this year. So, again, a swing and miss there, as we've talked about the past few weeks. Kelechi, there's just no way you give him a point because he was just abused in coverage again. Like I said, he didn't seem to line up well and really put up the worst grade in the defense in terms of PFF. So,
yeah, not a lot to say there.
With that, we go to offense. Catcher Cobbs, no influence. But here's where we talked about kind of gushing a little bit about Oscar Cardenas. He had the 79.9 PFF grade, which is second highest on the team, right behind Tremaine Bell, who we just talked about. He really led that offense, especially that great. He had some great run blocking. He had a great run blocking grade, which was actually about an 84.1, so high quality again. And then you're talking about getting those 2 receptions for 15 yards. To be honest, that one where he caught, there was a third down, or I think it was maybe a second down, and he caught sort of a screen pass. He had somebody go and try to tackle him. The defender just kind of bounced off him.
Yep.
But even on that Brady pass, he also drew a pass interference that was picked up. I just don't understand it. I mean, he got smacked. So again, I guess we weren't calling pass interference. So
not consistently, anyways.
No. Any other thoughts on Oscar?
No, I mean, I think he did a great job. I mean, obviously like to see him utilized a little bit more in terms of reception, him and Leroy, but, it just doesn't seem to be the direction they're going in terms of the play calling. But in terms of their pass blocking, I mean, run blocking, he seems to be, really doing everything that we expected that he would.
And with that, I think I'll just give you 2 points for this because he played so well, got such a high score on this.
Woo!
So for the season, you are up 5-1. So hopefully, I don't know, Kendrick might show up. I don't know. Maybe Julon Williams gets thrown as a kick returner and maybe they can get some big points here. But I need him going into Memphis.
Well, when we get to UTEP and North Texas, I'm sure we'll see them again. All right, before we go, let's talk a little bit about how the rest of Conference USA fared this week. Once again, it really wasn't a great week for Conference USA. UTSA is now the only unbeaten team left in the conference. If you look at a couple of the games, SMU had a Hail Mary pass right at the last minute to seal the win over La Tech. Just sort of a crazy pass. I mean, he threw it up. It just happened to get tipped and landed right into the receiver's hands in the end zone. And one of those just really lucky games for SMU. Marshall was up against East Carolina and then allowed 21 unanswered points and ended up losing the game. And then you had, Troy beating down Southern Miss. I mean, offensively, they only had a field goal. They ended up with a defensive touchdown. So not really a great showing from Southern Miss there. Really, the bright spot was FAU beating up on FCS Fordham. And then in conference play, UAB just really imposed their will on North Texas. So that was kind of a surprising, not that it was a surprising loss for North Texas, but it was a surprisingly bad showing for North Texas. So, kind of, again, UTSA over Middle Tennessee really looks like one of the bright spots for Conference USA this week. Any thoughts?
Conference USA is starting to really play out like we thought. And in some cases, looks a little worse than I thought. Southern Miss, I didn't think was going to be this bad. But they're not looking very good at all. UTEP is still bad. North Texas is looking even worse. I just, you don't want to look ahead, but who's going to challenge UTSA besides UAB?
Right.
In the West. So
I mean, La Tech. The thing for me with La Tech is just they are so inconsistent in their performances this year that I'm just not really sure what to make of them. I thought they would be better, but they've just kind of gone. They back and forth. They played well against Mississippi State, then they barely beat an FCS team, and then, struggled against SMU. I don't know. I just don't really know what to make of them.
I think they'll still be tough because there will be 8 games. It'll be our 8th straight game that we play. Mm-hmm. And then we don't seem to play well in Ruston, so it'll be a game to watch. I think UAB is still going to be the toughest test.
Sure.
But La Tech certainly can really put a damper on us.
So looking ahead to Memphis, what did you think about their game against Mississippi State? Anything that kind of made you change the way that you think about them?
Not really. I mean, maybe they doesn't seem as strong as I would have thought they'd be, but I think there's going to be a really tough matchup. I think it's going to be at least similar to the BYU game last year. I don't think there's going to be that big of a disparity in terms of the talent, but I think it's going to be a tough game. And I think that's where we've talked about the offense really being able to show up. So for me, I think that our defense definitely will be able to travel, but we're going to have to find some way of getting, as we talked about before with Frank, getting him in a rhythm with the receivers, and with Sincere hopefully getting him on track in order for this offense to be able to move a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to be a long day in Memphis if we can't get that offense going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm AToves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll see you next week after our game against Memphis.